Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. There is a sign-up sheet here, but on the flyer for the next program on your seat, if you look on the back, there's a web address, and you can get online. So rather than sign this, you can do it electronically if that is your choice. So I'm going to send this around, but you can do it that way. And if you do it that way, the Vermont Humanities Council will send you a survey tomorrow. So that would be better than signing this. But there are two choices.
Report card.
Otherwise, we're going to fill it out and say you loved us so much. It was the best talk you've ever been to.
No, we won't do that.
So it is 7:01. You're here, and you matter the most. Welcome to this Vermont Humanities Council First Wednesday event. I'm Bob Jolly, Athenaeum Director. This is happening in 8 other places around the state. I think we were the second institution to do this, in the second location, and it's been a great program here for 15 or 18 years. We're really pleased to have Dona Ann McAdams here in conversation with John Kalaki. I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup is here, the Executive Director of the Vermont Humanities Council. He's going to say a few words in just a minute. I just want to mention the sponsors. They're on here. The first Wednesday's statewide sponsor is the Vermont Department of Libraries. The series is underwritten here at the Athenaeum by the St. Johnsbury Academy. And it wouldn't happen in this room every single week without support of Adler and McCabe, PLC, and the Friends of the Athenaeum. Yes, thanks to the sponsor. There's a community input sheet which looks like this, which is in the back of the, it's in the landing, it's on top of the piano. If you're interested in filling this out, grab one. If you fill it out and drop it off here, I will send it on. So that's here. I just want to mention, next Wednesday here in this room, we have a program called Visible in Vermont, Our Stories, Our Voices. It focuses on experiences of people of color throughout the state of Vermont, challenging racial microaggressions and the racist acts and behaviors that often go unchecked. This project is an opportunity for dialogue and reflection from majority white communities who are unaware of the impact that their racial actions have on our community. Sha'an Moulier will be here leading that. There'll be both a panel discussion and a community discussion, and there'll be an exhibit in this space that we're going to set up on this weekend. So that's next Wednesday, February 12th at 7 p.m. This is getting far ahead, but on Tuesday, March 3rd, we are going to be having a Vermont Reads event at Central Cafe here in this town. And Christopher may talk a bit about this, but this is the book, this year's book, The Hate You Give. We will have copies here that will be available to give to you and to check out, and then we'll have a discussion on March 3rd at 5 p.m. More about that as we get closer. How many of you came from Donna's exhibit at Catamount? It will be there until April 3rd. This is a statewide exhibit, so you have plenty of time to see it here. When it leaves here, it's going to the Helen Day Art Center in Stowe from June 19th through August 22nd. And then it's going on to the Amy E. Tarrant Gallery at the Flynn from August 29th to November 21st. So this will have had 5 locations around the state. It's a really fantastic show. And one of the first that's really been a statewide event like this. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over to Christopher, and I'll get out of the way. Dona Ann McAdams was born in Queens, New York in 1954 and grew up in Lake Ronkonkoma?
Ronkonkoma, Wild Goose Resting Place in Algonquin.
Thank you. She studied photography at the San Francisco Art Institute. She received an MFA in Visual Arts from Rutgers University and a BA in Cultural Anthropology from Empire State College. Her photography has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of Art, the International Center for Photography, the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA, the Library for Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, the Robert Miller Gallery, the Primavera Fotografia Barcelona, among other venues. Her work is in the collections lost my place, of the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Centre Pompidou and Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris, de France. Since 1983, she has been committed to bringing cameras and photography into marginalized and underserved communities. She has built community dark rooms and taught photography inside New York City homeless shelters and day programs for people living with severe mental illness, on the backstretch of a thoroughbred racetrack, and inside a small farming community in West Virginia. In 2010, she collaborated with Maurice Sendak and Lynn Caponera to establish the Sendak Fellowship, a residency program for people who tell stories with illustrations. And in this discussion, you'll probably hear a lot of what Donna has done besides that. And you'll hear even more about John than what I'm about to tell you. Representative John Kalaki moved to Vermont in 2010 to run the Flynn Center for the Performing Arts after working as a nonprofit arts administrator in New York, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, and San Francisco. As executive director of the Flynn until his retirement in 2018, access and inclusion initiatives were central while presenting acclaimed artistic, educational, and community engagement programs with a $7.7 million balanced budget. It does matter that you can balance your budget. We do it here, and it's hard work. His commentaries have aired on VPR and have been published in VT Digger, the Burlington Free Press. His films and videos have screened internationally and been seen locally in Burlington, Bennington, Stowe, St. Johnsbury, and on Vermont PBS. For our speakers, here is Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup to give us some words himself. Thank you.
I'm going to add just a little bit. My name is Christopher. I'm the executive director of Vermont Humanities Council, and the last time I was here with Smithsonian curator Eleanor Jones Harvey, I recognize some of you were here at that. Raise your hands if you were here for that talk about the domes downstairs. It was an amazing talk. Over the last year and a half since I've been director of Vermont Humanities, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to travel to libraries and spaces all over the state of Vermont, bringing humanities programming, and no place is more special than the Athenaeum for lots and lots of reasons. I'll be with Eleanor again in a few weeks. I know she has fond memories of being here, and we hope to use her Athenaeum experience to drag her back to Vermont again next year. I want to say how great that you were talking about Visible in Vermont, the exhibition that's going to be here. That's actually supported by a Vermont Humanities grant, and we don't take credit for everything, but that is part of what we do. And of course, Vermont Reads is one of our other programs, so I was glad to see a copy of the book sitting here on the desk with an advertisement for a book group. I'd encourage you to be part of this conversation too. It will connect very neatly in many ways with the talk that John and Donna will be having with us this evening. So March 3rd at 5 p.m. If you want to get more involved, to start your own Vermont Reads project, please do be in touch with us. I just want to acknowledge before turning it over to our speakers how grateful I am that John and Donna are here with us this evening. John has been a terrific mentor and teacher of mine for the last 10 years, almost since the day he moved to Vermont. And it's really an honor to welcome you into this space. And I thank you for being here. Your thoughtfulness and inclusivity, your warmth, and your keen sensibility around art and access and social justice is deeply inspiring for the work that we do at Vermont Humanities. And of course, one of the things he does is he introduces me and all of us to amazing people that we haven't yet heard of, one of whom is Dona Ann McAdams. I'm so excited that we're learning about you now, even though you've lived here for many years. And welcome to First Wednesdays.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming now. The light is blocking about 4 or 5 of you in the back corner, so if you want something, just raise your hand really high, because I might not be able to see you. I'm not going to ignore you. No, I'm good. It's just the projector. So anyway, you know, as a curator, it's a profound privilege to go to an artist you admire and say, let's do a retrospective of your work. And then you are charged with the responsibility of presenting to the public 45 years of work. Dona Ann McAdams is an artist that I've always loved her politics. I've always loved her social justice lens. In all the bodies of work that you'll see up at Catamount Arts or in the catalog or that Dona's going to share with you tonight, you'll see that the other is embraced. The other is us. That she is not a detached journalist covering street actions. She's actually part of the street action. She invites us into the politic of the now. And so whether she's working with performing artists, and she is renowned. There was a coffee table book called Caught in the Act that Rizzoli put out in the late 90s of the work she did for 24 years?
24 years.
24 years.
Well,
she was
one space,
the house photographer of PS 122 in New York. And in the 80s and 90s, it was the place that the emerging avant-garde was housed. And she was there every night, and that's when I first met her. She would be, I'd be in the audience, the artist would be here, and she would be on the floor taking pictures. But they weren't promotional pictures. You'll see, we'll show you some of those. They are pictures of the artist in action. And then she and the artist would work with those images. And she always sees them as shared images, that they're not her images. It's not her statement about an artist. It's the artist's statement that is foregrounded for Dona. And in all the bodies of work, you'll see that she is a very empathetic artist, but there is no other. It dissolves. And in the beginnings, I think we can see her influence as a street photographer. The influence is there, but it carries through to all the bodies of work. So it's so amazing. And we started planning this 2 years ago, and all of a sudden, all around Dona, the wider world was focused in on her again. There's a show called Art After Stonewall that opened in New York and is in Cleveland and Miami. And it's an interesting premise. The Stonewall riots were 1969, so it was the 50th anniversary, and for many it was sort of the watershed of the gay rights movement, people fighting back after police harassment. And so Art After Stonewall, the curatorial premise of the show is artists that came of age after that after people fought for their rights and how they were influenced. And it wasn't just that they were queer artists, but they had a queer sensibility because of this. They were the next generation. And so it's a very compelling show, and so Dona's in that show. And then I think you have the book here, it's called We Are Everywhere. And again, it was tied to the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall histories, and I'll have Dona talk about that book a little later as well. But it's sort of like, I guess if you last long enough and 50 years come around, you can have a retrospective. But what was nice is we were planning this, we didn't even, as we planned it, and the show opened last June in Brattleboro. But it didn't occur to Dona and I that it actually was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, because that,
that might have informed our choices a little bit more.
Yeah. So we're gonna start really in her very early years. We're gonna look at some of it, and let's leave in New York.
Now, this is the going forward one.
All right.
And that's the little razor thing.
Now that's Mom and Dad, right?
No, this is my father and my grandmother, and this is the house I grew up in Lake Ronkonkoma, Suffolk County, Long Island, New York.
And is that you taking the picture?
This is a photograph I took, yes. This is a self-portrait. I'm the snow woman.
And what year was this?
This is 1977.
77. Okay.
So.
And then you went to San Francisco.
Yeah, I left. You can see why I wanted to get out of Long Island from, and I got in my Volkswagen Fastback and I drove to San Francisco. And so this photograph I took in 1974 on Geary Street in San Francisco. I had Gary Winograd, Lee Freelander, Hank Wessel were some of the people that I worked with at the San Francisco Art Institute. This is one of those early photographs, 74.
Here's what's, first I love this photograph, but I want this one to stay on your retinas as we move forward. Because what's interesting about this to me, as not the artist, but as a curator, is that there's always a center in Dona's pieces, but it's as important what's happening around the frame in Dona's pieces. And the 5 points you talked about.
John Zurkowski, when he finally convinced the Museum of Modern Art in 1972 that photography was an art, because remember, it wasn't. And still sometimes people will say, oh, what do you do? Are you an artist? And I'll say, I'm a photographer. Oh, I thought you were an artist. I thought you were a painter. I'm like, no. So there were 5 things that Zurkowski and the acolytes of him were interested in. It was vantage point, frame, time, detail, and the most interesting thing of all of the 5 is the thing itself, so whatever it is. So that was some of the things that I used when I was first making photographs in San Francisco. And I basically sat in on classes at the Art Institute. I wasn't an enrolled student. I just kind of crashed because I was working full time as a dental assistant, which is another reason I left Long Island, because I didn't want to end up being a dental assistant. Not that I didn't love my mother, but I didn't want to carry on in her tradition. So those are the 5 things.
So this is the more, I would say, that you see the formal influences from some of the teachers, but of course Dona in her street side, oh no, sorry, I skipped, I was going to go to Polk Street, but here's another one. Do you want to talk about this one?
Well, this is another classic example of that kind of sensibility of the photograph being really complete and full, and the edge being incredibly important to me. The little girl with the soda, the guy on the edge, and then I like to chop things up a lot. So you'll see that vertical pole, and then the guys in the uniform behind it, and then look. So I like all of those components and dimensions in the photograph.
But this is also 77?
This is probably 76, maybe.
76.
So I'm 22.
Okay. And then another side of San Francisco at that time is Polk Street. And
this is not in the show or the catalog. This is special for you all tonight.
But I think what you see in the very beginning of Dona's work is that the street photography and the politic was as important as a formalism. And she brought the formalism of, that could be that woman sitting in the chair, and then the edges, the same kind of framing. It's so interesting to me that even though it's a much more radical thematic, it's the same formalism that Dona presents in this work.
So this is the Turkey Point nuclear power plant in Miami, Florida, and I lived in San Francisco and was an activist, very involved with the gay rights movement, and very close to Harvey Milk. Everybody know? Do people know who Harvey Milk is? Anybody? Okay. So I met Harvey. I ran out of film in Dolores Park, and I needed a roll of film, and I went to the Castro Camera because somebody said, oh, there's a camera store on Castro Street. So I walked in, and there was the barbershop chair, and there was this guy with a ponytail and a mustache and an accent very similar to mine. We both were from Long Island. And I told him, I said, I need a roll of Tri-X. And he said, just one? And I said, I only have like $2. So he said, well, why don't we set you up with a charge account, and you can come in and charge anything you want. And we got into a conversation about my work and where he was from and what was going on. And he said, if I'm not here, just tell Scott that it was okay. Harvey said it was okay. So then I came to find out that Harvey Milk was the mayor of Castro Street. I had no idea. And then I became very active in him getting elected. And when he was assassinated, along with George Moscone, I had to leave. I couldn't live there anymore. So I moved back to New York, and I moved to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And the light in San Francisco is so, Western light is very beautiful, and it's very open. And when I came back to New York, it was so, it was a cavernous space, and I just couldn't get my perspective. And I thought, what will I do? How will I? What kind of pictures will I take? So I decided, for some reason, that I would photograph industrial landscape. And so my first venture into that portfolio was to go to Peekskill on the train to photograph the Indian Point nuclear power plant in 1978, in November of 78. And by March 28th, 1979, the accident at 3 Mile Island happened, and then that was one of the first, that was the first sort of activist portfolio that I made, was to go and photograph nuclear power plants. So this is Turkey Point. And this, I learned to juggle to take this photograph. It's a self-portrait. I'm the woman in the middle. And the sort of subtext to this is they're juggling our genes, because you think about what plutonium does, and uranium has a half-life of 186,000 years. And who's in charge of these facilities, and how is it working, and how did that happen? The valve stuck, so, you know. So that was, that's TMI, right after probably in April of 79. No, actually, it's in the January of 1980.
And your father had also just died at the same time as Harvey died.
Yeah, my father died. 1978 was not a good year. Jonestown in San Francisco, Joan Baez came out and sang. Then Harvey and George Moscone were assassinated. Joan Baez came out and sang. And then my father died, and I just thought, okay, you know, I need to come back to New York and figure out what I'm doing. So, yes, bad year.
So, again, the politics.
Okay, so this is 1983, and so as a young person, I was concerned with, in 1972, the war in Vietnam and choice for women. So, pro-choice and anti-war were two of my early concerns, and this is the war. This is a protest in Washington, D.C. for called Artist's Call, against the wars in Central America, against the United States intervention in Central America. So that's 83. And that's Bread and Puppet. That's there. Those are theirs. Yeah, so.
And this photograph is in our show at Catamount.
This is in the catalog, yes. And
but
interesting.
It's all new show as well, right?
Well, what's happening now, which is very interesting, is that I was contacted by a curator who stumbled upon a box of Artist's Call materials at the Museum of Modern Art. And Artist's Call had 200 artists, Nancy Spiro, Leon Golub, Klaus Oldenburg. A lot of people were really involved in this exhibition, and she found this box and thought, oh. So I photographed a lot of dance and performance events, but I also photographed the street protests around that event. And in 80, this is 83, so Artist's Call was 84. And then in 85, I decided to go to Central America because I wanted to understand what was happening. And I was so moved by the work that Artist's Call did that I went to Guatemala and Honduras and Tikal and worked on the street. And so now the curators have decided to pick some things from the Artist's Call show, but then I decided that I wanted to look at what that work from '86 in Central America looked at like. I never really looked at it before. So I'm work printing that now, so I'm actually looking at it for the first time since I took it in '86. So we'll see if I have something interesting.
Now, how did you find yourself going to PS 122 and becoming the house photographer for this old public school that was taken over by 3 or 4 artists, and then you were embedded and lived with them for 20 years, 25 years? So
coincidentally, I lived on a diagonal on 9th Street from Performance Space 122. And I also worked at a copy shop. So I would be making Xerox copies or photocopies of a lot of these performers' work. And I thought, well, look at these guys, are pretty interesting. You know, look at what they're doing. And I became friends with one of the artists, a dancer named John Byrne, who was coming in often to do his own personal work and also to do his flyers. And he and Beth Lapidus and also another dancer, Tim Miller, said, why don't you come to PS 122? And I thought, well, where is that? I didn't know where it was. And they said, it's right across the street from your house, that school building. So I basically got roped into it. because my friends needed to have pictures taken. And then they hired an executive director, Mark Russell, and he actually formally came and said, would you come and photograph here, the space? So I worked with him from '84 till he left in 2004, and then I left in 2006.
And what was amazing is Donna would be there photographing sometimes the dress rehearsal, if there was one, or the opening night, and 2 days later, the photo would be in the Village Voice, Soho News, the New York Times, and it became the record, the public record of many of these artists. And if, remember, we're in the 80s now, and many of the artists died of AIDS. So some of Donna's work is the only remaining artifact of some of these artists, and they were the most vital front line of the avant-garde in performance work. So it's really kind of an amazing body of work, and she's won an Obie Award for this work, and this big table book came out. But we have a few of these in the show, and it helped us name the show Performative Acts, because we thought we certainly wanted to include this, but this wasn't, we wanted to include all the different aspects of Donna's work. That this work is very well known in New York. This work is not very well known in Vermont, so of course we wanted to include some of this. And many of the people are dead. So it is amazing to think that she has David Warnanovich. She has a beautiful photograph of David. He's dead. I mean, there's so many people she's photographed. It was heartbreaking to go with her through the archives and realize that an entire generation of artists were lost to AIDS, and that she was there with them as they were in their early 20s, making their first theater works, and maybe their only theater works. They didn't have another decade in them. So at the same time, ACT UP was happening, and Donna's was a member of that and the street protests. So we're going to see some of those work too, and they kind of overlap, as well as, did people see Fun Home?
I don't think I have Paradise in this slideshow, John.
Yeah, but it's Lisa Krohn is the person who wrote Fun Home that was just on Broadway, and Alison Bechdel, it was from her book. Well, Lisa started out with sort of it was 5 lesbian brothers, but it was before 5 lesbian brothers.
The Wow Cafe, One Women's World.
Cafe, right. And so there's that work too, the early feminist work, early lesbian work, ACT UP work, but right now, so this is Ishmael Houston Jones, who's still alive, still going. This is one of the most remarkable performers. Ethel Eichelberger was Ethel's stage name, and he is a very gifted, trained actor, Shakespearean actor, and he would do these outrageous drag personas, juxtaposing them with these Shakespearean riffs that were just mind-blowing. And it was an extraordinary, extraordinary artist. And I was at the Walker Art Center, and when I would come down to Thomas Theater and see him, I always wanted to bring him to Minneapolis, and he kept saying, oh my God, you don't want an old drag queen coming to Minneapolis. But I did want an artist this extraordinary to come, but he never came. He became very sick, and he ended his life. But this is sort of, well, you probably know the exact second of what was happening here.
Well, what happened was Ethel's accordion strap broke. And so he said, if only I had a piano. And then Laurie Side, who is the incredible technical director, wheeled the piano out. And then Ethel said, oh, if only, as Minnie, if only I had a piano stool. And so there's Laurie bringing the piano stool. So
out it comes. But it's that moment. You know, it wasn't staged. It was that exact moment that was caught. And I think that's sort of the power of Donna. Meredith Monk. Our shared story with Meredith is that she had just worked 5 years on creating an opera, and she's a minimalist composer, and she was with Houston Grand Opera, and she had never done something of that scale, and she also had never worked for 5 years on a project. and she was utterly exhausted. And she really didn't know what she wanted to do. So I was at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and I said, well, let's write a grant for you to compose music and stuff. And she said, well, I actually just want to go in the studio and experiment. I don't really, I mean, I've been doing this for over 30 years, but I just want to make me work. So I tried to write this thing, and those of you that write grants, we all get carried away, right? We write just gobbledygook, trying to say something that's actually not there and overpromise something. And especially if you're writing grants for artists, for something that's going to be 18 months away, you sort of say what something is when it's not been birthed yet, and then you're kind of stuck. You get a grant to do this. And so anyway, my assistant said, John, this makes no sense. What are you saying? And I said, well, Meredith just wants to go in the studio and experiment. And she said, just say that. And so luckily, we did get the commissioning grant to do that. And this piece was at the Walker and at
PS 122.
PS 122.
This is Volcano Songs. I have a side note about Meredith Monk. When I moved back from San Francisco to New York, I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, as I mentioned. And the first piece of live art that I saw at St. Mark's Church was Meredith Monk doing the Plateau series #1. And I had no idea that years later, because I wasn't photographing performance at all then, that I would actually get to work with her and take this photograph. So I can sing the riff from that piece. I use it to call my goats in. It's like curling. It's the Swedish technique that Swedish women use to bring their goats in from pasture or cows. Everybody, people, you know it.
So this is a pure Donna piece. Describe this, because it's such a lovely story.
So I was working with a group of women that were an offshoot of PAD, which is Lucy Lepard, who was an incredible activist and writer, had a group in New York City called PAD, Political Art Distribution and Dissemination, and they had a group of women, feminists, who were doing this project called Carnival Knowledge, and they wanted to get together with working women, porn stars, to sort of contrast the two different lifestyles. And so I was asked to do the publicity still for the two of them, which ended up being a performance piece. And so I came up with the idea of the signs and the markers, and everybody should write if you're a feminist or a porn star and make your sign, and we'll hold the signs. And at the last minute, I said, okay, now everybody take off your shirts and cover yourselves with your signs. So the Annie Sprinkle and Club 90 and Gloria Leonard and Veronica Vero, who was a member of that particular group, were very excited to do that, but the feminists were a little, concerned. But it ended up being an incredible experience because people swapped signs and people sort of had fun during the moment. So I love this photograph a lot, and I love all the women in it too. And I'm so lucky to have been able to have the opportunity to take that photograph.
And didn't you tell me that, I didn't see this performance, so the performance itself was all of these women sitting down having tea together?
Yes, it was about how women are women, their mothers, their wives, their lovers, their porn stars, their feminists, whatever they are, everybody is sort of, we're all very similar in our own respects. So it was a beautiful performance. They had cookies and tea.
So at the end of the 80s, AIDS was really in New York, very frightening. The pandemic was completely wiping out this community, this gay community of artists, but many of the people that Donna had been working with, and it also became very politicized. And so contemporary artists were making angry work. They were working with body fluids. They were working in confrontational ways. And of course, that happens at front lines of the avant-garde. So much of that was happening at PS 122. So what we're going to see now is some of the work from the 90s, and it is politically charged work that was sort of taken out of context and demonized from the right, saying that the National Endowment for the Arts, the federal money, should not be supporting artists that are this provocative. From the left, sometimes they didn't like the work either, so they didn't want to support it. And it was like, well, like is for what's over your couch at home. You know, freedom of expression is a very complicated thing, as we all know, in how we face these things even today. So we're going to blaze through some of the culture wars of this, and because Dona was right there, literally at the foot of these artists as they were making this work. And she also was the center of the storm, because the media on all sides, the right-wing media, the liberal media, all wanted these images that Dona had taken. So some of these are rather historic. This is Karen Finley. She was one of the 4 artists that was called the NEA 4. They had received each a $5,000 grant through a fellowship program for individual theater artists, performance artists making work. And the National Endowment for the Arts was up for reappropriation in their budget, and some of the conservative members of Congress decided that this kind of work should not be supported. So they pressured the head of the National Endowment for the Arts to deny grants to 4 artists. And it happened to be 1 lesbian, 2 gay men, and Karen Finley. And they were all doing work that was rather provocative. And I want to talk about Karen's
And
work.
unfortunately, I was the photographer who had photographed all 4 of them. So I had everyone. I had all 4 artists. I had all 4 performance pieces that were in question. So in '91, there was when it happened, the phone ringing saying, "Oh, give us the chocolate smeared woman, give us her, we want her." And I wouldn't release any photographs of any of them because I knew that would be used against them, against the National Endowment for the Arts. So I kind of became the visual triage unit for the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. And my relationship with this particular group, this particular portfolio, which is, you know, live arts, is that even though I'm taking the photograph and I own the copyright, it's a collaborative process between the person that I'm photographing and myself. So I never release, I don't have any model releases on anybody at all, because I feel like if you need to ask somebody for permission to reproduce, then you're not going to have a dialogue with them when you want to reproduce. So I'd rather talk to somebody and say, would you like to be a part of this? Do you want to do this? And when somebody asks for a photograph, which they do ask for the NEA for, I mean, last week I had a phone call about that. They need to get permission from the artists first, and if the artists say yes, then I'm happy to provide the image that they like, that they want to have, not what the other person wants. And this photograph, Karen does not want this photograph reproduced. She let me show this for this. This is the first time it's been seen ever in a gallery, or reproduced since it was made in 1989. So that's the chocolate smeared woman, Karen Finley.
We felt it was a very pivotal photograph to include in the show, but we were very tender about asking Karen if we could include it in the show, because, you know,
it's a trigger for her.
You can imagine the assault that Karen Finley went under when Senator Jesse Helms is holding this photo up on the halls of Congress and screaming about this woman. And it derailed much of her career for a long time. And so anyway, it's quite a blessing that, and I think it's a testament to Dona that Karen said, yes, of course, it's a retrospective of your work. So we're really proud to have it. And other people in the show, David Warnanovich, who just had a major retrospective at the Whitney Museum. Dona has a very tender photo of him in the show as well, doing a reading at a benefit. He died of AIDS. And was never, it's amazing, it took 50 years for museums to finally catch up to David Warnanovich's work. And now he's considered a major visual artist, but you know, back then he was kind of a street punk.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. And then a couple of years later, Ron Athey is an artist from Los Angeles, and he both Karen and Ron, all of these artists were performing at the Walker where I was working, so I always was getting their images from Donna, so that's our next connection. Ron he was a punk. He grew up in LA. He was, as a young boy, a revivalist preacher, and so he was used to being in the tent shows. His family would send him out, and he would start speaking in tongues, and he was quite provocative. And then as a teenager, he fell into drug use, but he was always looking around transcendence. That was a really interesting part of his life. So what he did is he combined all of these things about recovering from his own addiction, his kind of punk aesthetics, and his preacher. And he became a very interesting underground artist in Los Angeles. He then went to PS 122, and then he came to the Walker. And again, the National Endowment for the Arts was up for appropriation. So again, that summer, Senator Helms holds up this picture, calling him a cockroach. And that how can federal dollars go to support artists like this? It became so volatile against Ron Athey because what happened is most of the arts community ran away from it too because it was too scary. The work was too frightening to many people, and they didn't like it. So museums wouldn't support the Walker where I was working for supporting it, and the theater, TCG, Theater Communications Group at the National Conference, the head said I was irresponsible for presenting this artist. And so I called him up and I said, well, gee, Peter, did you see his work? He said, no. And I said, it's okay if you don't like the work. You can call me irresponsible then, but you can't call me irresponsible if you didn't see the work, because this is a powerful artist. What happened was, this man, for 20 years, did not work in America because of the attacks. And so he went to Europe and started working. And the Hammer Museum invited him to come back, and he and I did a talk 20 years after to commemorate this. Now, an interesting story that is that, I don't know if it was this image, but it was a Ron Athey image. Suddenly Donna found that David Bowie had appropriated it.
It's not this image.
What?
It's not this one, no, but
no,
it is Ron Athey.
It's one of Ron, and it had part of, yeah. And because Bowie decided he was like Andy Warhol, he could just take a picture and colorize it, and yeah, that would be his art form. Well, Bowie, of course, never asked Donna. And there it was, I think it was on a CD, wasn't it?
It was in an English publication called Q magazine. And he basically said that he had gone, I'm telling you now for educational purposes, because I have a disclaimer, I'm not allowed to talk about it except if I'm teaching. So he came to the performance at PS 122 and he took the photograph. And what he did was, he didn't, I did, but he took the photograph out of the picture from the New York Times, and he used he embossed it with Photoshop, he colorized it with Photoshop, and he used the thing that's called the rubber stamp, and he had the caption material under the photograph, but he just took my name off. And he did kind of not such a great job of removing my name, so. And I guess he didn't realize that I would find out, but I did find out. But I had to say, no. He made an edition of 50. So, but we settled out of court, and I put more in my, my brother Thomas always said, oh, you should have done this, and you could have gotten money like Jeff Koons and the puppy, but I was more interested in putting into practice more controls or for photographers, better ways for photographers to be able to have their work not appropriated necessarily. So anyway.
So while Donna was working, of course, with those theater artists, the streets of New York were exploding with rage around AIDS and the government inaction at this time. And so, of course, Donna was out there hanging from a street pole, I think it was.
I shimmied up the pole. I need a perspective.
And what was beautiful?
George Bush was at the Waldorf Astoria. That's why we were there.
What was beautiful about as we were looking, like, because she has a number of the ACT UP AIDS protest that have been shown in a number of different shows around the country. So it was like, well, what would be one that really captures, and we really like this one, but as we were looking at it, Donna realized that this man,
It's the center.
yeah, how you point, right, is
You know, I have to refer to the catalog now because I can't remember his name.
Asante.
Asanto.
Yes.
Asanto, who was the poet, Latino poet who had died. And we didn't know who he was, and now we know who he is. Yeah. So, kind of beautiful. It was the guys that did the book downstairs, We Are Everywhere, Matthew Leighton and Matthew Reamer and Leighton Brown, who figured it out. I didn't know that. They just went, oh, jeepers, look who that is. That's Asanto. So, and one more thing, I have to say something about David Bowie, so we are clear. I really love David Bowie, and I love his work. And I actually think that he didn't realize what he was doing. He really thought that the photograph was in the public domain. I mean, so I have to say that. So, David, you know, I'm sorry that you are not with us to make music anymore. But that's important because I don't think he really knew.
All right. We're on to this St. Patrick's Cathedral steps, isn't it?
No, this is City Hall. This is downtown. And there's a court case, and this is a pro-choice rally. And that's Father Frank Petrone, who is he's the head of the Right to Life. He's their religious leader. So that's him. And coincidentally, I didn't realize this, but it was Danny Litchfield at the Brattleboro Museum who realized that this guy was the same guy who bought the MAGA hats for those kids that were from that had this run-in with the Native American person back in. So that's the same guy. So, but we didn't want to give him any more airtime than he deserved. So, but just coincidentally, that's him.
So the theater work simultaneously to the street action work, and during that time as well, Donna went once a week out to Coney Island through the hospital audiences and began to work with.
So in 1984, I was hired by Hospital Audiences, which was a group of people that hired artists to go into day programs and places where people actually who had been deinstitutionalized and put out of institutions into group homes. They were provided special funding for artists to come in and give them, you know, exposure to arts and art, not necessarily art therapy, but the arts. So there was visual arts, there was dance, there was music, there was movement. And so I went to Coney Island and I shared photography with people who had been institutionalized but then put into day programs from 1984 to 1998. I worked not only at Coney Island, the Brooklyn Day Program, for that length of time. That was the one place that I went to every week, Friday mornings, 9 to 12 on the F train, all the way to Coney Island. But I worked in about probably 30 different institutions all over the 5 boroughs, sharing photography. But this is the only place where the group of artists that I was working with actually used my photographs as they drew on top of them. And it wasn't my idea, it was one woman in the group who I brought the pictures in and they would look at them and they would like them and they would trade them back and forth. And then Jane Smith one day just took a crayon to them and that's how this came about. So there's probably, I have about 150 of them because they belong to the artists and they would, you know, but I would get the ones that they didn't necessarily like. And I probably made 1,500, 2,000 photographs, and then they colored, and I don't know, they're, you know, probably, I don't know where they are now. I know where 150 of them are.
This was a very late edition because Donna works in black and white, so as we were putting the show together, it actually, all the curators from the different institutions were coming to Donna's farm to see the archives. And like an hour before, said, well, let's take some of those out. Because what I love about them, it's like I started saying, there's no other in Dona's. It's not a detached journalistic view, that it's pathetic. And I love what these are, because she allows these, they're not necessarily just portraits of these people, but they're participatory in the way that they're colored, and they have a kind of co-authoring of meaning, which I think is the same as the Karen Finley's, the co-authoring.
This is my greatest collaboration, working at Coney Island with this particular group of people. And I stayed there until the last of my workshop members was there. And once Seymour Greenspan left, you'll see his picture, that's him. Once he left, I just didn't want to, that was it. I promised that I would stay until all of them. I started out with about 30. So by 1998, he had left.
And now we're going to go to animals, because Dona has for many decades photographed people and animals, and there's just another component. I mean, there's many chapters the animals live in, so I think we'll start here when you went down to Appalachia.
Yeah, this is Georgie Hurd in Williamsburg, West Virginia, where my husband Brad Kessler and I lived. We thought we would actually move there because Brad didn't want to live in New York anymore. He wanted to have a more rural life. And so I went down there and I thought, what am I going to photograph? So I immediately joined the Farm Extension Cooperative, which is a group of women who, mostly older women, who teach you how to share recipes, how to put food by, how to can, how to garden, all of that. So as I work with them, I asked if I was interested in photographing these elder farmers in the community. So I photographed 26 of them while I was there. But we didn't move to West Virginia.
But you moved to Vermont.
We moved to Vermont.
And Melvin's from Vermont.
Melvin Lawrence, Polymeadow Farms in Shaftesbury, Vermont. We live in Sandgate, so he's right on 7A. And I just did a cold drive. I drove in the driveway. I went down to the end of the road, and I knocked on the door and said, you know, I'd like to photograph your cows. And they said, well, I don't know, maybe. And so after a couple of conversations and me coming and helping with chores, I got to do that. And I got to photograph their cows. I got to photograph when the cows left. I got to photograph when the goats came. And I got to photograph when the goats left and they moved and sold their farm. So it was, 15 years. And and now I'm a member of the Grange. I'm a Granger. Yeah, Battenkill 152.
I want you to remember the Geary Street lady from the first photograph sitting in the center of the street there, and that we talked about there's always a center, but with Dona's work, it's what's happening around this, and even here the head off, this over here, but that's as essential than the center focus as well. So I love that for decades, you see the same aesthetic grow, but the fierceness in the focus of the way she constructs her photograph. Now, Dona and her husband raise goats in Sandgate, Vermont, and the smallest
According
license...
to Greg Lockwood, who is our plant inspector, we are the smallest licensed dairy in the state of Vermont. With this year, we'll only have five does that freshen, if everything goes well. So we'll have, last year we had 6, and we make a hard-aged raw milk tome. We make about 50 wheels a year, and we sell it locally to Clearbrook Farms. But last year, because I had a show in Brattleboro, I sold it at the co-op. So I'm wondering what Helen Day has, like if I can have my cheese with my work at the same time, because it's the art you can eat. So yeah, so that's, and this is St. Mary's on the Hill. This is a group of nuns that I've been working with in Center Cambridge. They have cashmere goats, because I wanted to work with nuns for a very long time, but I wanted to work with nuns, and I won't lie, in full habit. It's like because they're beautiful. And I wanted to work with nuns because nuns are misunderstood. They're anarchists and they're incredibly interesting women. And I wanted to work with nuns that used animals in their service. So I did a cold call, just like I drove down the driveway at Polly Meadows Farm and called up and said, hey, I'm curious about working with you. And they said, yeah, come on down. Because they had read Brad's book, Goat Song. So they said, oh yeah, we know who you are. Oh yeah, come on, let's meet you and then we'll take it to community and see what's happening. So I've been working with them. And that's them visiting our goats. And that's Sister Mary Elizabeth saying hello to Hannah, who's the full sister to her goat, Pete. So.
We're at 5 to 8, so I'm going to speed through a few of these.
Speed.
Okay?
We're almost done, I think.
No, we have some great ones.
Oh, great.
So this is Donna's husband, Brad Kessler, at their farm. But he also is an incredible writer, and he wrote a book called Goat Songs. And it's actually a memoir of these two city kids moving up here and like thinking we're going to have a farm and not knowing anything about what that means. It's a glorious book. And anyway, I love Brad and I love that goat, so it's a perfect picture.
Oh, we do have a lot more. This is the racetrack in Saratoga, where I worked. I've been working since 2004 as a licensed hot walker and advocate for backstretch workers and thoroughbred retirement. So I want to make sure that the horses have a place to go after they run, or if they don't run, if they're not fast enough, they should be able to have a life.
So in the show, Donna has a photo of people at the spectators cheering the horses on that side, but most of her interest, again, is the unseen people at racetracks. So there's been a lot with these backstretch workers, and it really is about the humanity of these trainers and the dogs, and this family shot I just love.
Yeah.
So very much. And these are other hot walkers? Or?
No, this is, that's a outrider there. That's Roger. That's Tootie with his grandson. He's a groom, and that's Leroy, who's the night watchman for Nick Zito. So these are all workers. And I've been focusing on working with African-American workers because they are the original workers, track workers, hard boots. So I've been photographing them since I started. This is a diptych of Evening Attire, who's a 10-year-old thoroughbred. And I'm interested in the sort of landscape, animal as landscape, and two pictures that work independently but at the same time.
We had a tussle about this one because Donna has done a number of these diptychs with the horses, and mostly it's about the beauty and the slope of the horse's neck or the hindquarter or the back. But I kept saying, well, those are nice, but we're pretty far along with performative acts.
So the curators, you know how they are.
We had to have something in there. So the washing the tail, I said, okay, we got it. This could be a performative act. We got a horse in it, because these diptychs are gorgeous. And, I hope there's a whole other show called Equitation of just Donna's, horses, because they really are very special. She has a bond to them. And then...
You folks remember with Bill and Lou, Green Mountain Oxen? The two oxen that at Green Mountain College, and Lou got hurt his leg, and then they wanted to put him down, and they wanted to eat him, and then they couldn't eat him because no one would slaughter him, and then PETA came, and okay, that's Lou, and that's Bill, and together they are one, and this is how they would be yoked, in their yoke. That's how they would stand together. So.
But in the middle of the college realizing you have to put one of them down, and oxen work as a duo, so if you pull, you usually cannot put a new duet partner in as you're pulling with your oxen. So one was very sick, and the students were very upset. PETA comes involved, so it becomes a political thing. Donna walks in the middle of it and talks herself into going to hang out with these oxen in the field for a couple hours to make sure that they knew who she was and stuff. And so it's really not different than an ACT UP street protest. in a fascinating way, that there's humanity in this, and the same thing, that these animals are part of the photograph, that it's not a detached thing, for me anyway. This is Christine running for the governor last year here in Vermont, and Donna was, of course, very interested in photographing her, and Christine was going all over the place, and so Donna does what she does best, and she just jumped in the middle of a parade and took the photograph in action, as it was, and Christine loves this photograph, and Donna gave her a copy of it, and she was very moved by it. And then this is Rosie O'Donnell organized a lot of Broadway singers to take a bus down on a Monday when Broadway was dark to sing in front of the White House.
The Kremlin Annex, remember they did this whole setup in front of the White House. So there's our president as a balloon.
And then...
Oh, now this really quickly. So this is a project I'm working on now called Still Time. And it's photographs that, it's a memoir, it's a visual memoir. And the photographs are mostly mine, but not all of them are mine. This is me. My father took this in 1955. So I will have this photograph and I'll write something. So it's my photographs and little stories. So I got a grant from the Vermont Arts Council. I'm really happy happy for many reasons, but it makes me do something that I've been procrastinating for a really long time, and I'm really excited about having the relationship between the photograph and the stories. So that's that one, and then this is the last one. So that's a picture of me when I first came back from San Francisco in 1978. This is on top of the Empire State Building. So I think I'm going to write about this, something about this photograph too. So these are surprises; they're not in the show.
So we have time if you want to have questions. We have some, and then there are catalogs that people are interested in. Donna will sign the catalogs over there, and it's $15 that supports the library here. And do go 5 blocks away down the street and see the show in person, because it's beautifully installed there. It looks just fantastic. And it has been such a treat to open it in Brattleboro, have it in Rutland, bring it here, and also an honor to speak in your library. This is one of my favorite buildings in the whole state. It's incredible. And I want to thank the library and for having us here, and Christopher for believing in us, and also for the Humanities Council to realize kind of scholarship around an artist is important, and to allow artists to talk about their work is really fantastic. And so those that want to stay for questions, we can stay. I know it's 8 o'clock. I don't want to keep people later, but any questions, we're here for you. Okay. Anybody? Yes?
The very first photograph, the woman in the center drew my attention. She seems to be hiding from you.
Yeah, she might be hiding from me.
She's got her
she might be hiding from me. Might have been Sunny.
Or she might not have even known you were taking that picture, do you think? Can you comment on it?
Well, I knew she was there, and I knew she was shading herself, but I was more interested, and I don't know if you can see it in the slide, but in the woman that's in the window, who's looking through the window. Yeah, and I'm also interested in the whole setup of the, but you know, people, I mean, I'm a street photographer, and early on that's what I did. So it could be that she, you see the woman in the window? Yeah.
Where's the woman in the window?
Up there in there's a little corner. Yeah, but she could have been, I don't really remember, but I'm glad that you think about that. It makes it even more successful for you then. So.
I didn't see her. I still don't see the woman in the window. I know she's there because you told me she's there, but she's too fuzzy.
But she might be, I have a photograph that I just found recently from the same time period where somebody is definitely like saying, don't take a picture. Yeah. Yeah. But a lot of times what happens with me is because I'm a woman and I'm small, people don't pay attention. They just don't.
You get away with it.
Well, I get away with it, or yeah, I guess I get away with it, yes. Yes.
So you don't ask permission to
No.
take a picture of it there?
Not on the street, no. Sometimes I do. I don't shoot this way so much anymore. Now I'm more embedded in community. Now I actually go and spend time with people and develop a rapport. But early on, when I was a young kid in my 20s, I would just go to a parade. I would just shoot. Absolutely. I would shoot. Now I make. I don't shoot, I don't take, now I make. But then I shot and took, definitely.
And Donna's using the same cameras and technique that she was using back then. She's still hand printing all of her own work.
I use a really small Leica camera, small camera. And I have it's a small little TV thing.
She's still using the same camera?
Yes,
I
yes.
was going to ask that question, what equipment do you use?
I use a Leica, now I use a Leica M2 and a Leica M6 with a 35mm lens. And I have an analog darkroom in Sandgate, Vermont, that I make prints.
And exclusively black and white?
Only black and white. Although I won't lie, I have an Instagram account, and on my Instagram account I do shoot in color. And I have no problem with people using digital. I think it's great. But for me, I'm not really interested in that. I thought that they would get rid of analog photography and film, and I would be done. But unfortunately, it's having a resurgence now. So we're set. It's like vinyl. You can get film, no problem. You can get film, you can get paper. And analog darkrooms are coming back into colleges now too, after they sort of got rid of them. So it's like vinyl. It's like, yeah, we like that scratchy, negative. So yeah, I've never really shot any color. But as I said, you know, on Instagram, there's color. I shot some nice pictures of.
Did you explain why you prefer and why you wanted the exclusively black and white?
Because I'm more interested in the abstract qualities of black and white. I'm not really interested in the reality of color. I'm more interested in, you know, I see in black and white now, I sort of, to a certain extent. Although having said that, I photographed today with my little iPhone in color. But I'm not really interested in that. I want to be able to make my own pictures. And to make a color photograph back in the day was very toxic. I mean, with black and white photography now, there's good chemicals are still chemicals, but they're not as toxic as they used to be, and certainly not as toxic as color. And I think that actually the toners and all the plastic and all that goes into digital is actually much worse than what I'm doing in my little analog dark. So, never really been interested in working in color.
So you get patterns and more than...
Yeah, I'm into pattern, light. Yeah. Yes?
Since so much of, you know, a lot of this is a record of historical record in a sense, that wouldn't exist if you hadn't been taking them. And it just occurs to me that now everything is photographed almost every minute of the day.
Yes.
And I'm wondering both how you feel that, what the impact that has on where we live, but also on the work of the street photographers.
Well, I think that the digital camera, what happened with digital and professional is that the professional photographers made it possible for the amateur photographers to exist because we were the ones that made the money for Kodak or whoever it was. And then as soon as the digital camera became available, I don't want to say amateur, but regular folks were able to do that, and they sort of took over. So the professional guys that were putting money in sort of went like this, and the regular folks kind of went like this, and they tried to kind of get rid of, you know, the analog way. But my whole thing is, when I would go to a performance and I would photograph and I would see somebody shooting with a digital camera, and shooting with a digital camera, and shooting, and then going down, putting their head down, and looking at what they got, when some poor dancer is like dancing their butt off up there, and they're just not even in, they're not part of the experience. The other thing that I think is really important is that if you take a photograph, make a photograph, shoot a photograph, and you have it, and you go away, and you spend some time, and then you process it and you look at it, you're not sort of looking at it like you make it at the same time. That you're not, the moment is later, it's the after image of what happened. And I think what happens is that people are just shooting and looking and posting, and whatever, I'm not judging, I'm just saying, and I think that there's not enough time to really experience what's going on around you. Although having said that, I love Instagram, I do, you know, so, but I don't know. Does that answer it sort of, kind of, a little bit?
You know,
I don't think it's bad, but I just think it's sad that your whole life is mitigated by how many likes you have on your feed. Or you're constantly looking down, or you're constantly talking, and you're not being. You're not being. You're not seeing or being. You're liking and cheating.
Also, a lot of those photographs are taken to present a certain image of what one's life is like, which may not really represent what one's life is actually like. And so it kind of seems in opposition to what you're doing in a sense.
Yes. Well, there's two people back there. So however you want it to be.
I'm just so totally amazed. I go to museums to Portland and I see people come in with their cameras and all they do is stop at the painting or the sculpture, click it, next one, next one, next one. They can go through the whole room in less than half an hour. And they're obviously not at the place.
Well, they're not looking at the painting. They're photographing the painting and then later on looking at the photograph of the painting.
Yeah, yeah, to document that they've been there.
Yeah. Well, you know what Walter Benjamin says about the aura, right? You know, in the work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, important article that if you're looking at the painting, if you're here and you go into the back of this, if you look at the painting that's in this place and you stand in front of it and you look at it, it is so alive and it speaks. So you can, if you take a picture of that, and then you can, and you can look at it later, but it's not going to be the same as actually standing in front of the work and seeing and feeling the work. And there's beautiful work in this library. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Somebody else back there?
I have too many questions to ask one, but...
Well, go fire away. Friend?
The concept of photography versus what's happening now in digital, they seem so different. The pace of them and how you present them. Digital photography, kind of rear projection or light projection. Now, I understand that you're projecting this image, but John, you've curated a show where you have prints. So there's a physical relationship to the image, and there's time that's different. Maybe there are different words for them, or there are different art forms for sure. What's your relationship to what's happening now, compared with being a maker of images and of a physical image?
You mean, how do to what's happening in contemporary?
I guess to go deeper into, yeah, I guess you approve of Instagram because it's fun, but it's not what you do. And
no, but I also think that the people that shoot digitally can make beautiful work. But for me, there's something about the web process, something about the photograph being in the paper as opposed to sitting on the paper, you know. So that's for me. Now that's not to say if you have one of my silver gelatins and then you have whatever, I don't even know the language of what they're called, you know, whatever that's called, and you look at them, I still think that for me, not the wet process is more interesting to me. But in terms of content, I mean, the photograph is good regardless of if the medium. You know, if it's a good photograph, it's a good photograph.
I suppose the good question is what's going on with the producing of the physical art and the seeing process of any human being. Because I think that you speak to perception, the art of photography, composition, there's the art of that. But there's also the art of actually producing the images and keeping space from the image for a time so that you can look at it critically.
Well, that's really important to me.
Let me dive in as well, because it's been great, because as we worked on this, I looked at a lot of the catalogs that Donna's been in, and she's been published in many books, and that was part of it. I looked at her website, and has a lot of bodies of work there, and that was part of it. But it wasn't until We were in her archives, and we were holding the prints. And even I would catch sight of some of the ones on Instagram, and I'd say, oh, hold that one, let's look at it. But it had to be, and even as nice as our 60-page catalog that Brad Rosine did for us, the photographs, they don't look like anything like they look up at the gallery, because they're not to scale, and they're really not in relation to each other. So even we didn't want to have them framed. We wanted to touch them fully printed out. And that's how we made the relationship in the show, because we had to have that equal value of, as you said, the photography in the paper, you know. And so it was just a wonderful way of taking all this source material that wasn't really the source at all. So it wasn't until we held the paper together, because those were the photographs that we wanted to share with you all.
They're hard to make, too. Make no mistake. And now that I'm 65, those big prints, I write on the back now when I'm pulling a big 16 by 20. You know, I started when I was 64. I write 64 on the back. So, because I want people to know that I made this. You know, it's hard. And I have to write everything down because, all right, this corner was burned for 10 seconds. I had to dodge this. It's a whole dance when you're working analog. It's a living dance, and you don't get to go back and do it again. You do get to go back and do it again when you fail, because you screwed up. So, you know, but I love that about it. I love that it's wet. I love that it's like light coming down onto paper. I love everything about it. And I never really had an interest in doing anything else. That's why when it was going to end, I thought, all right, I'm done. But I'm happy. I'm happy. I did this, and I made this work, and I'm really content with it, and I'm happy with it. Although I'm happy that I can still do it. I'm happy about that, you know. But I don't sort of think, oh, what am I going to be working on? What's next? I don't think that way anymore. I just, you know, okay, let's see what's going on, what's happening. What do I feel like doing today?
Well, yes, but you're continually working. And, I mean, the show opened last June, and there's already another 2 or 3 bodies of work.
Well, I'm looking at old stuff.
Yeah.
I'm in the gold mine. I'm digging.
And after the Vermont tour, this then goes to New York to a gallery. And so what we want to do is bring more New York into it, because it's for New York. So looking at some of the early work, but even more of the recent work. Like the nuns, the cloistered nuns with the goats, they actually live in New York. And, you know, one of the elders passed away, and Donna was invited to the funeral. And I was like, show me those photos. Show me the photos of the funeral, you know. And she said, we'll see if they're any good. I don't know where that was a funeral, you know. But you're always making work.
But the one that John likes is the one that I don't like. I like this other one. So we'll see.
Okay.
You know, but
Where are you showing them in New York?
Howe Gallery on Lower East Side in 2021. I don't know, April maybe. I don't know.
So, you know, it's 8:15, it's the middle of the week here, and thank you all so much for coming. And